The Lord of the Ring, The Fellowship of the Ring, on VHS. This is a movie I saw in theaters as a 10-year-old. And we have a new Lord of the Rings movie coming out this month, so I figured, what better time to talk about the Lord of the Rings trilogy on VHS. Welcome back to the Ecto Violence channel. My name is Alec. Today, we're talking Lord of the Rings on VHS. Specifically, The Fellowship of the Ring. So let's go ahead and pop this tape in. So the first thing we're going to see is a New Line home video logo. Always love seeing the home video logos attached to these things. And then an FBI warning, skip this, skip this, skip this, skip this. Then there's a Two Towers video game PlayStation 2 ad. And I gotta say, that's a huge perk of these VHSs is the ads beforehand, especially stuff like this that's tied into the movie. Like the soundtracks or, for example here, the video game ads. You never know how much you miss these film has been modified bumpers until you go back and watch a tape either. And when the movie starts, right? And with the opening of Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of exposition dumping. They kind of explain everything about the ring and its upbringing, right? Now this is very important. This is a very rich and detailed movie with stories and characters. I still don't know every character's name, you know what I mean? And I consider myself a pretty big fan of these movies. But I still know I'm going to get comments saying, how did you not watch the extended versions for this review? Well, first of all, I just want to review the simple theatrical releases on VHS. I'm aware of the extended editions, obviously, and I have seen them. I think the casual movie fan is maybe someone who can just get away with watching the theatrical versions as well. And I only recently found out the extended versions had a VHS release. So eventually I do plan on adding those to the collection. But I gotta say, the mood and the vibe, everything about this works, you know? So you can probably tell I'm a little more casual of a fan of these movies than some other people. But as I'm going through this movie, I'm watching, Hugo Weaving as Elrond, opening up this movie, and just, for the short time he's there stealing the screen, all of the effects of the mix of all the awesome practical effects, the CGI, everything working together, because this is at that time where everybody was still doing that. Not just some people. Everybody was doing this with these big budget movies. It was a lot of practical effects. CGI was fully developing really as an art form at this point, everywhere. And I say that because I think these movies started filming in like 1997, or at least pre-production. So Elijah Wood is Frodo, okay? This is an iconic role, and for those of us who grew up in the 90s, Elijah Wood was already pretty much an established name. Now, if I'm thinking back, I remember finding it very interesting that he was in Back to the Future 2 as a kid. He's in The Good Son, he was in Deep Impact, Flipper, and now I think he's just one of the coolest, most interesting actors on the planet. Speaking of cool and interesting actors, Sir Ian McKellen as Gandalf, again, steals the show. He carries these movies on his big wizard shoulders. And as we're talking about Gandalf and Frodo here, we may as well talk about some of the effects of this movie and about how they shot it, right? So all the different forced perspective and stuff is still, to this day, interesting to look back on. Because that's stuff that's been utilized in films since, the 20s and 30s. That Peter Jackson was still using in mixing all of these different styles of effects from all these different decades to give us one of the greatest masterpieces of cinema ever made. I'm not a big fan of fantasy movies, sword and sorcery movies, This is definitely the best. These three movies, and it'll never get any better for me, I don't think. There's no way. And I will say, I haven't seen these on 4K yet. I'm planning on getting the 4Ks because I've heard they look great for these movies. But I was obviously watching VHS, and I will say, all the CGI looks great still. And that's probably because I'm watching it on VHS, but I don't know. I'm sticking with it. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. Ian Holm is another person we saw, at least the generation that I was. We grew up watching Alien and Aliens, and he's an alien. I don't even think I put that together as a kid, but now looking back, it's like, wow, he plays some very important, iconic roles in my life, So seeing the Shire in general is awesome. They obviously shot this in New Zealand, Peter Jackson's homeland. Well, there's also so many memes from this movie at this point. They're uncountable. I tried to write a few down that I was witnessing.
I suppose you think that was terribly clever.
Well, no. And yes. After all, why not? Why shouldn't I keep it?
So I'm obviously not going to go through this entire movie plot point by plot point. I think that would kind of be pointless at this point. Everybody who's watching this has probably seen these movies enough. But I have to say, it's visually so immersive, these movies. The only things that I can compare it to are Star Wars and Harry Potter in that. Just how these worlds are created, like Middle-earth feels like a real place. These people and their problems and their politics feel real. And that's crazy. I'm talking about wizards and shit. Goblins, trolls, orcs, dark forces, and rings that turn you invisible. And let's talk a little bit about the music as well, because Howard Shore is an amazing composer. I think this is probably his most famous work. I really enjoy his score for Crash, the Cronenberg movie from 1996, I want to say. Very interesting movie, but the score for it's very weird too. So apart from Howard Shore, there's also Enya involved in this. And honestly, it just works. Peter Jackson and his collaborators knocked it all out of the park. I don't have any notes for Fellowship of the Ring, you know what I mean? Christopher Lee is another person that he was big in the early 2000s. All of a sudden, he became huge for youth culture. Honestly, like, him being in this and Star Wars Attack of the Clones, a little bit of Revenge of the Sith as well, but that's what kind of made me like, I'd like to see that guy play Dracula. I hadn't seen those movies, as a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid. Those Hammer Dracula movies fucking rule, though, and so does Christopher Lee. This is, at this point, a comfort movie for me, though. I saw it as a kid, and then it became big, and so, I would hang out with friends. We would play Lord of the Rings, you know what I mean? There were enough cool characters you could be somebody interesting, at least. Everybody would fight over being Legolas, except for the one kid who thought he was Aragorn, I gotta say, also, as a kid, I never understood the weed jokes in this movie.
Finest weed in the South Valley.
Your love of the halfling's leaf has clearly slowed your mind. But we still have time.
Like, Gandalf just be fucking getting high all the time. So let's talk Sean Bean, Orlando Bloom, and John Rhys Davies. So I already know who Sean Bean was at this time because I had watched GoldenEye. I loved GoldenEye at the time. Not just the game, but I loved the movie. Still do. And he plays the villain, Alec Trevelyan. You can see why I remember all this stuff. Orlando Bloom, obviously went on to do the Pirates movies too, more of a main character in those movies. And John Rhys Davies, an underrated performance, I think. Not enough people talk about that one. He was in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Great. That's another one that, transfers over, like I was talking about before with Ian Holm being an alien, it's just, these really awesome roles. I think you could thank Peter Jackson for stuff like that. I like the effects and the reactions behind both Galadriel and Bilbo being the presence of the ring. The Bilbo scene scared the shit out of me the first time I watched it, but every time after that I thought it was hilarious. Now the shock value and the laughter is gone, but I do still think it's mildly entertaining. And before I rate Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, I do want to remind you that I do have a channel membership you can join. You will get an exclusive video every month if you join the highest tier. The tier before that gives you access to early videos as soon as they're finished editing and I upload them. And the first tier, which is mainly there so you can just help support the channel and be thanked in the videos. I do offer this both as a channel member and on Patreon, so check either one out. Links are both in the description. And I'm going to say I'm going to give Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, a 4.5 out of 5 hearts. I think it's amazing. It's incredible. There's no notes. The only reason it's not receiving 5 stars is because one of the other Lord of the Rings movies is my absolute favorite of the trilogy, and it's going to get those 5 stars. But we'll get there when we get there. If you like this video, be sure to check out this one and hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.